For nearly 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were held up as proof that Hollywood love stories could actually last. An Oscar-winning actress and a Grammy-winning country star, both Australian, both forged by hardship, both finding in each other what they had long been searching for. The world watched them walk red carpets hand in hand, tearfully thank each other at award shows, and speak in interviews with the kind of warmth that made even the most cynical observer believe. But in the late summer of 2025, Nicole Kidman filed for divorce after 19 years of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences, and with that, the carefully constructed fairy tale came crashing down. What has emerged since is something far more complicated than the glossy image ever suggested. And Nicole, quietly but unmistakably, has begun to tell her side of the story. To understand what Nicole is now exposing, you first have to understand what she was carrying long before Keith Urban ever entered the picture. Nicole Mary Kidman was born in Honolulu in 1967 to Australian parents and raised in Sydney, where she grew up in a disciplined, ambitious household. As a child, she was painfully shy, so shy that her teachers worried about her confidence. She blushed when called upon in class and struggled to express herself in ordinary conversation. But she had a powerful imagination and found her voice through performance, first in ballet, then drama classes, then youth theater. By her teens, her talent had outgrown her shyness entirely. Australia's film industry was flourishing in the 1980s, and she seized every opportunity, landing her breakthrough in the 1983 cult film BMX Bandits before Hollywood came calling by the end of the decade. Then came Tom Cruise, her first great love, and by her own quiet admission over the years, her first great wound. They married in 1990 and became one of the most photographed couples on the planet. But the marriage brought shadows alongside the spotlight. Scientology cast a long presence over their life together, and when the marriage ended in 2001, Nicole lost not just a husband, but primary custody of their 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor. Friends who knew her during that period have said she felt stripped of motherhood itself, pushed to the edge of her own children's lives. For a woman who wanted nothing more than a family of her own, that rupture became one of the defining injuries of her life. It was a wound she carried quietly but never fully healed from. It was in that raw, searching state that she met Keith Urban. Keith Lionel Urban was born in New Zealand in 1967, the same year as Nicole, and raised in Queensland, Australia, where his father's love of country music shaped his entire identity. He picked up a guitar at 6 years old and never really put it down. Country music gave him both purpose and escape from a home life marked by financial tension and instability. By his teens, he was performing in talent shows and small venues, and by the time he dropped out of school to pursue music full-time, there was never any question of a backup plan. Music was his only way out. But alongside the talent came demons. By his 20s, he was already struggling with alcohol and substance abuse, and when fame finally arrived with his 1999 self-titled American debut album, it didn't steady him. It amplified the chaos. When Nicole and Keith first crossed paths at the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles in January 2005, it looked like destiny on paper. 2 Australians, both global stars, both born the same year, both carrying the weight of battles the public only half understood. Nicole, later, admitted she didn't even think he was interested at first. He was polite, but guarded, and though they exchanged numbers, he didn't reach out for months. She has said that his initial silence nearly ended the story before it began. But when he finally called, something clicked between them that moved fast. By May, they were being photographed together. By the end of the year, she was describing him in interviews as the man who had swept her off her feet. In June 2006, just over a year into their relationship, they married at the Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel on Sydney's Manly Peninsula. She wore a Balenciaga gown. He serenaded her at the reception. The world exhaled in collective joy, but reality arrived fast. Just 4 months after the wedding, Keith checked himself into a rehabilitation center for alcohol abuse. Nicole had barely settled into married life when she was thrown into crisis management. The tabloids circled immediately, painting her as a woman who had married a ticking clock. But Nicole didn't flinch publicly. She visited him in rehab, stood firmly by his side, and refused to give the press any satisfaction. In later years, Keith would credit her with saving his life during that period. What insiders noticed, though, was something more layered than simple loyalty. Nicole had been denied the chance to fight for her first marriage. With Keith, she was determined to be the one who stayed, the one who fixed things, the one who made the broken whole again. She had cast herself as healer, and she threw herself into that role completely. For several years, it worked, or at least it appeared to. They built the image of Hollywood's most enduring romance carefully and deliberately. She gave acclaimed performances in films like Rabbit Hole while balancing major studio productions. He won multiple Grammy Awards, toured relentlessly, and carved out his place among country music's elite. When their daughters Sunday Rose arrived in 2008 and Faith Margaret in 2010, Nicole poured herself into motherhood with an intensity that everyone around her recognized as deeply personal. She had lost her first children to a custody arrangement that haunted her. She was not going to lose these girls to chaos. She enforced routine, structure, and stability in the household with what friends described as almost military focus. Keith's approach to parenting was different. He leaned toward leniency, toward being the fun parent, the one who made the rules feel optional. Their daughters loved them both, but people close to the family quietly noted that Nicole sometimes felt undermined in her efforts to create order, while Keith sometimes felt like he was being graded rather than supported. These weren't screaming matches or tabloid scandals. They were quieter fault lines, the kind that don't announce themselves, but slowly hollow out the foundation beneath a relationship. By the mid-2010s, whispers of tension had started to surface more persistently in entertainment media. Stories circulated about scheduling conflicts, about Keith's nightlife, about the weight Nicole carried as the emotional center of their partnership. Both of them denied everything consistently. She gave interviews insisting they had never been stronger. He stood at award podiums with tears in his eyes, thanking her as his rock. And yet, people who were genuinely close to them described a dynamic that had slowly curdled. Nicole had grown exhausted, not from loving him, but from the relentless labor of holding everything together. Keith, for his part, bristled at the idea of being her project. He wanted to be her equal. He wanted her to look at him and see a partner, not a patient. This tension between her need to stabilize and his need to not feel controlled is perhaps the most honest thing that has emerged from the wreckage of their marriage. It was never a simple story of one person being the villain. It was two people whose deepest needs were pulling in opposite directions and who had built a public mythology so powerful that dismantling it felt like failure neither could afford. Every red carpet appearance in the later years reportedly carried a kind of performance quality that observers noticed. Keith would grip her hand tightly, kiss her shoulder, lean in to whisper something. She would smile, composed, gracious, beautiful, but those who knew her well said the smiles had started to look rehearsed. The tenderness was real in origin, but strained in the present. They had become actors in their own love story. As the 2020s arrived, the whispers in entertainment media turned into something louder. Anonymous sources began describing a couple living separate lives under the same roof and under the same brand. Paparazzi photos showed her increasingly attending events alone. Keith was spotted on tour without his wedding ring. Neither of them addressed each other directly in interviews anymore in the way they once had. Nicole spoke about how marriage required enormous work, a statement that sounded humble but landed differently given the context. Keith's declarations of love began to feel, to those listening closely, like lines from a script he had once believed in but no longer fully trusted. The decision to end things, according to those closest to them, was not the result of a single explosion. There was no final dramatic confrontation, no discovered betrayal that sent everything crashing. Instead, it was a slow, painful acknowledgement that they had stopped sustaining each other. Nicole, heartbroken but clear-eyed, had reached the point where she could no longer continue being both partner and protector. She had spent 19 years pouring her stability, her energy, and her emotional reserves into a marriage that had asked more of her than she had ever fully admitted publicly. When she filed for divorce in late September 2025, citing irreconcilable differences, the industry gasped. But for those who had been paying close attention, the ending had been arriving quietly for years. What Nicole has done since the divorce is not explosive in the tabloid sense. She has not held a press conference or given a tell-all interview. But she has spoken through carefully chosen words in public appearances, through the projects she is choosing to take on, through the way she is now discussing her past. She has spoken about the emotional toll of always being the strong one. She has spoken, indirectly but unmistakably, about what it costs a woman to prioritize someone else's healing at the expense of her own. She has spoken about her daughters, about the kind of love she wants to model for them, about what a healthy partnership actually looks like versus what it is made to appear. And in the most telling sign of all, Keith's own behavior post-separation has said nearly as much as anything Nicole has. His first major public performance after the divorce filing drew immediate attention when he appeared on stage without his wedding ring. More striking still were the lyric changes, alterations to songs he had long performed, subtle rewrites that seemed to revise the emotional history of the relationship in real time, as if he were already in the process of reauthoring the story. For a man whose artistry had always been rooted in emotional honesty, those altered lyrics read like admission. The golden couple image had not just faded. It had been actively taken apart. What Nicole Kidman is exposing ultimately is not a scandal in the conventional sense. She is not revealing affairs or addictions that the public didn't already know existed in outline. What she is revealing is something more uncomfortable and more universal. The cost of maintaining a performance for the world when the reality behind it has long since moved on. She spent nearly 20 years being the anchor, the healer, the patient savior in a love story the world desperately wanted to believe in. She played that role with grace and with genuine love. But somewhere along the way, the role consumed the woman. The Nicole Kidman who is emerging from this divorce is not bitter. She is not vengeful. She is simply, at last, refusing to keep pretending. After 19 years of holding the fairy tale together through sheer force of will, she has chosen truth over image. And in doing so, she is saying something that resonates far beyond her own story. Love is not a rescue mission. And the most honest thing a person can do, sometimes, is acknowledge when the story they have been telling no longer matches the life they are actually living.